Hi, guys. I just wanted to kind of start tonight with something that's I found over the last number of years has really been helping guys get free from sexual sin and sexual impurity. And I guess what I'd like to do is just talk to you about what that is. If you're familiar at all with Every Man's Battle, you'll know that in that book I talked about the what I call the first vulnerability in our sexuality as men, and that vulnerability is our eyes and our mind. Um, doesn't take a guy very long before he reaches about the time of puberty where he begins to just understand just how powerful that vulnerability is. And what the vulnerability is simple. It's the ability to draw sexual gratification straight through our eyes, right into the pleasure centers of our brain. We know that the brain is our largest sex organ. We know that all of our sexual impulses and feelings are processed through the brain. And of course, the eyes are hooked right to the brain, and we can draw that sexual gratification. And that it's a very real gratification. It's every bit as strong as stroking a thigh or rubbing a breast. It's really a form of foreplay. And so, obviously, if we're ever going to be free from sexual sin, we can't be just letting our eyes do whatever they want to do. If we don't defend that vulnerability, we'll trip. Because what that does is whenever we're staring at the girl in the string bikini or, the mother tucking her kid into the car seat in the parking lot with short shorts on, whenever we're staring at that sort of a thing, it literally does drop sexual gratification into our sexuality and puts us in a place where our engines rev higher, and we tend to stay at oh kind of a high idle, at least in our sexuality. And then later in the day we think about that, we lust over it in our minds, and a lot of times we'll end up masturbating and kind of completing things that way. So we need to understand that. And that's why I wrote about that in my first book, Every Man's Battle, because if you don't get your eyes and mind under control, you'll never get free. When I engaged the battle, the first thing that the Holy Spirit told me to do is to work very quickly and very hard at guarding my eyes, learning how to look away or bounce my eyes away from the sexual things or the sensual things in my environment. Does anybody have any questions about that before I keep going? Everybody understand that? Nodding, good. So, one of the things that I found, however, is that there is a second major vulnerability in our sexuality. I've known it even when I wrote Every Man's Battle, but the funny thing about publishers is they don't let you write a book as long as you want it to be. They only let you write it a certain length, and you have to fit everything in there that you can, but you can't fit in everything that you know. And so there's a second vulnerability that's become even more important to understand over time. And the first vulnerability is in men, and it's not really too much in women. Uh, Women, for the most part, are not visual in their sexuality, they're more relational. And so they don't get into the problems with pornography as much from the standpoint of just the visual pleasure, maybe looking at a magazine, looking at a static picture of nudity. Um, However, there is this second vulnerability that it's in both men and women. In fact, we're facing the first tsunami wave of female sexual addiction that we've ever seen in the history of America or the world. And the reason is because of this second vulnerability. So I want to talk to you a little bit about it tonight, because what I find is when I talk about this vulnerability, most men aren't aware of it to the extent they need to be, or maybe not aware of it at all. And that's why I also call this the stealth trap or the stealth vulnerability, because it's just very difficult to connect the dots and to understand what's causing the sexual sin as it flows through this second vulnerability. So I'm going to just talk to you a little bit about my own story and then the story of another guy named Logan. And what I want you to do as I share these stories is I just want you to take a little time in your own mind and think about the parallels you see in your own life. I think you'll spot them right away. Most guys do, because you will have this vulnerability. Uh, every woman you know will have this vulnerability. And again, as I always say, if you don't defend a vulnerability, you will trip because these set us up to fall without question. So back when I engaged the battle, for me, that would have been back in the 80s, 1980s. So I don't know. Some of you guys look pretty young. You may not have even been born then. But one of the good things about that is, I've been around a while in this battle. I have not masturbated in over 30 years. I haven't even gone onto a computer to, find something sensual to lust over or a television. It is possible to get free and to be completely free. And but there was a time frame between the time where I dealt with that vulnerability number one and then had to deal with this second vulnerability. And here's how it played out. When the Holy Spirit told me I needed to work hard on guarding my eyes, I thought basically that was the only vulnerability, and that once I had my eyes under control, my battle would be over. And I was really excited about that because I was really sick of the porn and all the stuff that surrounds it. And so I put some rules in place, taught my eyes how to bounce away from the sensual things, like I said. And within 6 to 8 weeks, my eyes were under complete control. And I felt like I had cut off all those outside sources of sexual pleasure that were coming through my eyes and my mind. So the thing that surprised me in the aftermath of that, in the wake of that, is that my masturbation did not stop. And I could not understand that because I really felt like that first vulnerability, I had it under control. I had it defended, and yet something was tripping me up, and I couldn't figure out what it was. Now, the first thing that I did, like most guys, is I just figured I was a pervert, that I was a loser, that I was a jerk. Here I was having a great sex life with my wife, and yet here I was still masturbating, and I couldn't understand it. Whenever we can't understand something about this battle, the first thing we need to do is to do a real strong self-inspection, because in my experience in counseling guys through the years, this is what I've always found. If someone is tripping up and regularly moving into sexual sin, there is a reason for that. It doesn't just happen because you're some kind of a loser or a nut. There is something that's prodding it. And so as I started, that's why it's important to do a self-inspection, because you need to find out what it is that's tripping you up. And so what I did was I started to look really hard at my life to see what was going on and when the masturbation was happening. And what I found was that nearly all the masturbation was happening late at night in my office at work. What I would do during the day, I was in full commission sales. If you've ever been in full commission sales, there's a lot of pressure to it. If you don't sell something, your family doesn't eat. So, there's this big pressure to really push forward and be a man and be a warrior and get out there and accomplish things. And if you're going to sell things, you're going to have to do it during the day. And so most of my office work had to be done at night after I had supper with my kids, after I had played with them, tuck them into bed, tuck Brenda into bed, then I would head back to work. And I found that most of the time then this masturbation and those sorts of things were happening at my office. As I began to really look at it, I began to discover a pattern. I mentioned a moment ago that there was strong financial stress. And one of the first things that I noticed that when my financial strength or stress was the highest, that's when my sexual sin would kick in the most. That's when I would masturbate. And I was just going, okay, what's going on with that? Why was financial stress causing me to masturbate? The other thing is that I was finding that um, my wounds from my childhood, my father wounds, were causing me some severe problems. My dad was a national wrestling champion in college, heavyweight. When I say my dad can beat up your dad, he could. My dad was huge and he was fast and he was charismatic, handsome as like Elvis Presley. I mean, he could sing like Elvis Presley. He's just a great guy. Everybody loved him. Well, my dad never really accepted me as a man because he had always wanted to have a son that was a cocky wrestler like him and that would go out with him drinking and take women to bed, that sort of a thing. I know that's an odd thing for a father to have as a goal for his son, but that was my dad. And um, didn't matter that I was a really good football player. Didn't matter that I was a really good baseball player. He never accepted me as a man, and he told me on his deathbed that I was a disappointment to him. So, you've got all these things going on. Now, by the time he was on his deathbed, I was fine. I mean, I knew about all that. I already dealt with all those issues. But back when I was fighting this battle for purity, I hadn't dealt with those things yet, and I was severely struggling with wondering if I had what it takes to make it in the world of men. I was still kind of trying to figure out, my full understanding of what manhood means and whether I could come through in the clutch with the sail to feed my family, those sorts of things. I mean, we all know as men that we're designed to come through in the clutch. We're designed to fight big battles and live great adventures. That's who we are. And at times I would really doubt that as I was struggling building my business. So I would also find that when I was struggling the most with my um, sense of manhood, so to say, that would be another time that I would masturbate. And so as I began to, as I found those out, um, I began to put two and two together. And I realized that what I was doing was I was essentially dealing with that pain and dealing with that stress. I was taking it into my own hands, well, actually, literally, with lotion and towels and all that. But what I wasn't doing is I wasn't handling it like a man. What a genuine man does, he doesn't run to medication, the medication of porn and masturbation and the good feelings that flow from that. He doesn't run to that to deal with his issues. What he needs to do, if he's a Christian, is to turn to God, turn to God in prayer, and turn those financial stresses over to God, and then also form a deep enough relationship with God where you are in a position where that genuine intimacy with God um, makes you feel close enough to Him, and that you don't need the false intimacy that comes from the porn and the masturbation to medicate. Okay. So what I needed to do at that point was I needed to take on a new attitude, which was more of a manly attitude, a soldier's attitude. I'm at war. I'm going to rise up and fight like men fight. Okay. And then to take on a new purpose, which is to win this battle for the sake of my family and my kids. And what I found in that battle was there was never anything I've ever done in my life before or since. Football doesn't matter what I did. This was the thing that most established my manhood and established me as someone who belongs in the world of men, and I'm a guy to be reckoned with out there in the world. So what I began to do is I began to really begin to take these issues in the proper direction rather than taking them in the direction of using porn and masturbation to medicate that pain. Does that make sense to anyone? Anybody have any questions before I go on? Nope. Okay. So, in order to make sure that you understand, I'm going to just share a story from Logan, because I think his story explains it even better. I really like his story, and I like where things ended up for him. So Logan is a friend of mine in Des Moines, and he's a good Christian guy. He had moved here from the East Coast, and he was here for a while, and then he started his own business, which is a construction business. Now, he started that business in November. It's probably not the best time because, wherever there's winter, it's hard to cure cement, and about the only kind of work you can do in the winter is inside work. He didn't have a lot of contacts, so he didn't have much inside work. So here he was, not making very much money. He has two kids, a wife, and it's a struggle. But he had a plan. He had purchased a big plow blade for the front of his pickup. He was going to plow snow off of driveways and just great big parking lots all through the winter and support his family while he waited for spring. The only trouble is that was the only year in 50 years of me living here that the droughts of summer kind of extended all the way into winter. After November, it snowed in early November, never snowed again. And so here he was with the debt of the big plow blade, running through his savings, having no work. And he had called me and said, Fred, can we go to Starbucks? I have an issue I need to talk to you about. I wonder if we could meet. And I was shocked. Okay. One of the things I knew about him was that he had gotten over his porn and masturbation back in his teen years, and he had been totally free from it for 10, 11 years. And so you might say, well, how does an invite to Starbucks let me know that there's a sexual sin issue? Well, ever since I wrote Every Man's Battle, whenever I get invited to Starbucks, man, it's never about, hey, can you come help me set up a financial budget, or can you help me with my son's throwing mechanics? Never. It's every single time. It's always, hey, can you help me with my sexual sins? So it's gotten to be kind of a weird, but that's who I am. Starbucks and Fred the sex guy, right? So anyway, I went there and met with him, wondering what in the world had kind of bewitched him back into the whole porn situation. And he sat down with his latte, and he took a drink, set the cup down, and then burst into tears. And he told me that, I've been free from sexual sin for all this time, and now suddenly I'm into porn every night, and I just don't understand what's going on. And and again, like I did, he called himself a loser and a bum and all the things we call ourselves. And he just didn't understand what was going on. And so I, I just told him, look, before even almost before he finished his opening statement, I said, look, whenever there's an issue like this, there's always a reason. And all I need to do is ask you some questions so that you can understand, so that I can find out what that reason is, and then you can deal with that reason. So first of all, I asked him, some questions about his eyes and when the masturbation happens. And it was pretty clear he had a good control over that first vulnerability. Then I asked him about his relationship with his wife, and he said, gee, I mean, everything's good. He said, my wife loves sex. She's just that kind of woman. When I'm in my office at night, it's 6 steps away from the master bedroom. If I want sex, all I have to do is go walk 6 steps and ask, and she'll say yes. So he said everything's going good that way too. And that's one of the issues is here he has this great sex life, but he's still masturbating in front of his computer. Could not figure it out. Asked him a few more questions, ran out of questions except the big one, which was, how's your business doing? And at that point, I didn't know how his business was doing, but I just asked him. He later told me that he almost got up and punched me in the nose at that moment, because he felt like he had just poured out his guts. And, the table had his tears all on it, and it looked to him like I was changing the topic. But as you can tell from my story, I was actually right on top of the topic, and I was trying to find out if maybe there was a non-sexual issue driving the porn, just like it had been in my life, where the non-sexual issues of financial stress and doubts about my manhood were driving sexual sin. So he went into the whole story. He told me how he only had 2 or 3 weeks left of savings, and then his kids would have nothing to eat. He said he had already asked his mother-in-law for money, and I think we can all laugh at that. That's awful, to ask your mother-in-law for money. And he said that and other things are some of the most embarrassing things in his life that he had recently had to do just to survive. And he just had no idea what he was going to do, or what was going on. And I asked him, I said, well, how do you feel as a man? And he said, I don't feel like a man at all. I feel like the biggest loser. I can't support my family. My business is going to pot. I thought I was an entrepreneur, but I'm a loser instead. And so I looked him right in the eye and I said, you know what, Logan, I don't think you have a sexual sin issue. I think you have a financial trust issue. And he looked at me like a deer in headlights, or like a coconut had fallen on his head from 20 feet. I mean, he was complete. His mouth was hanging open. And I began to explain to him how masturbation and orgasms actually medicate stress and medicate pain. And so what I was talking to him about, and I don't know how much you guys know about it, but I just want to briefly talk about orgasms and what they do inside us, and why they're such good medicators for things like father wounds or financial stress. If you stop to think about how you feel at the point of an orgasm, it pretty much is obviously consistent with all of us. And one of the things that you need to understand, first of all, is that um, the natural language, the sort of the mother tongue, so to say, of a guy, when it comes to passing intimacy with a flesh and blood woman, a wife, would be things surrounding intercourse and the intercourse itself. And that's how we long to share it. That's how we share it. And nothing is problematic about that, as long as we're within marriage and within the marriage bed. But once we figure out that we can literally have an orgasm outside of marriage and outside of the marriage bed, even without a flesh and blood woman with us, that's where things begin to be a problem. Because one of the things we find very quickly as teens and as guys in college is that when things are really stressful, we oftentimes do run to porn and masturbation, orgasm, to medicate our pain. At first, we do it without knowing why we're doing it, but then it becomes a pretty big habit for us that even if we're having rotten times, even if we're having good times, we'll run to it because of how good that it feels. And I want you to stop for a moment and think about what an orgasm brings to a man. First of all, there's a sense of manhood and a sense of dominance at the point of release. That's consistent. There's a sense of control, a sense of everything being right with the world, if only for a moment, but it's very real for that moment. And there's a sense of connection with another human soul at that moment. So whether it's a pixelated girl on a screen or whether it's an actual flesh and blood woman, there's that sense of connection with another human soul, because again, our natural language is sexual. So up for passing intimacy with a girl. So it shouldn't surprise us that when we have an orgasm, there's this sense of intimacy and this sense of connection. So the first thing I want to ask you then is with those three things being true, let me ask you this. What if a guy is struggling with his manhood like I was? Well, an orgasm brings that sense of manhood and that sense of dominance, that sense of feeling like he belongs. All right. What if life is chaos like it was with Logan? His whole business is collapsing. Well, an orgasm brings a sense of control, sure, just for a moment, but it's a very strong draw as a medication. And then what if he's lonely? What if he's disconnected? What if he can't really doesn't feel that connected to people around him? Well, a sense of connection with another human soul comes with porn and masturbation and the orgasm that follows. So you can kind of see what begins to happen, whether you have loneliness or whether you have wounds, whether you have stress. Orgasm can really bring an instant, while it's not for very long, but it can bring an instant feeling of uh, healing for that moment. So when you go back to Logan's story, you go back to my story, I think you can see what was going on. There, literally, in both cases, there were very strong non-sexual issues, stresses, wounds that we were medicating with porn. You look in Logan's case, he hadn't looked at porn in 10 years. Suddenly he's looking at it. Why? Because suddenly he had chaos and financial collapse going on. His brain certainly remembers how to get relief from that from his teen years. And it's a very simple thing for him to suddenly get tempted in that direction. And he began using that with medication. Now, the problem with that is simple. Most of us it never occurs to us that um, sexual sin, using our sexual apparatus, can be driven by non-sexual triggers. And so here he had these non-sexual triggers, and the sin and the battle he was facing seemed like the same one he was facing when he was a teen, because, you know, you're using the same apparatus, the same porn, the same orgasms, all that sort of a thing. But the difference between was back then, it was all based upon sexual triggers, but now it's non-sexual triggers, and he couldn't figure it out. So all he could do is call himself a pervert and a rotten loser Christian, and not really know how to deal with it. So this is what I told him to do. I told him, look, Logan, don't even worry about the porn. Don't even worry about stopping the porn. This is what I want you to do. I want you to deal with the issues underneath the porn. And so I told him the first thing you need to do is turn your business over to the Lord, and really truly begin trusting him for the finances you need to feed your family. And I told him that you also need to pray more. The second thing I told him he needed to do was to really strengthen his relationship with the Lord. And what I meant by that was he needed to spend more one-on-one time with the Lord, just worshiping the Lord, not praying, not reading his Bible, but literally singing love songs to the Lord, like worship songs, second person love songs, especially where you're saying, you are altogether lovely, you are all I need, Lord. The songs that really connect us when we're singing directly to the Lord. Why? Because that creates a deeper intimacy, and it lessens the disconnection and the loneliness that can drive us to sexual sin. Then the third thing I told him to do is he needed to go to his wife and tell her exactly what was going on, because I told him real men don't keep secrets. Real men connect with their wives, and they battle this thing together as couples. You don't stand up. Uh, you don't run to porn and masturbate and get into sexual sin which are all things that can affect the rest of the family, even if they don't know about it. You don't do that and hide it when you're actually affecting them and hurting them. So that was the one that he had trouble with, in the sense that he kind of looked at me like, I don't like what you just said, and I'm not sure I want to do that. But before he left, he did commit to do it, and he did, in fact, do it. And the wonderful thing about it was his wife, since she knew that he was talking to me and he was willing to fight it, she just said, yep, we're going to team up together in this and we're going to win. So in the end, everything turned out great. I'm just going to finish it this way. I met with him again, about 8 weeks later at Starbucks, and this is what he said. I asked him, how are things going? And he said, it's the most amazing thing. He really wasn't paying attention to whether he was going onto the computer or not, but he, somewhere in the middle of that 6 to 8 weeks, he found that he hadn't been back on the computer for about 2, 3 weeks. And he said that as he began to turn that stress over to the Lord, and as he began to work with his wife and spend more time in worship with the Lord, everything began to change. And he said the best thing about it was that as he looked into his future, he could tell that he was going to be able to stay free, because what he was noticing is that as these stresses would come up, he would look at it and then call it what it was. He would say, well, this isn't a porn issue. This temptation isn't a porn issue. This is just a financial stress issue, or this is just a work issue. And what he was able to do then is to see things for what they were, call them by name, and then deal with them accordingly. You don't deal with a financial issue by running to porn and masturbating. Now, most of us do, but I mean, that's not how you fix it. How you fix it is to deal with it like a man does and address it according to biblical standards if you're a Christian and all that. So, one of the great things about it is I talked to him about a year later, and he was still free. He was back to being how he used to be. You know, obviously after 1 year of building a business, there's still a lot of stresses, he told me, but he was handling them. And now that he knew the connection, that there actually is such a thing as a non-sexual trigger to a sexual issue, he was free. And you know what? I found that in my life too, guys. I mean, through the years, I just don't medicate anymore. I don't even think about it. It doesn't even go in that direction anymore, because I know the difference. And I know there is such a thing as non-sexual triggers. And I keep an eye on the non-sexual triggers when they come in, when I feel lots of pressure in my business or whatever it might be. I just deal with it the way men are supposed to deal with these things, not through the orgasmic drugs of our sexuality. Does that make sense? Now, I'm going to say something very strong here. If you listen to what I just said, and if you begin to look for parallels in your own life, and then if you begin to handle those stresses or whatever the issues are the proper way, as men do, as opposed to how maybe little boys do, like I used to, you will be much, much closer to getting free. Now, you still have to deal with the first vulnerability. You still have to guard your eyes and mind. I mean, you cannot just defend one vulnerability and not defend the other. But I've talked to lots of guys who have their eyes and mind under control, but they can't quite get that final piece. Maybe they're 85% of the way to purity, but they can't quite get the final piece put into place. And usually what it turns out to be is this kind of an issue, a non-sexual trigger. Let me read you an email I just got this week, and I thought, man, this is great. I got this email this week so I can read it to these guys. But here's a guy who I just met him a couple months ago, and he had bought a copy of my book, Battle On, Battle Over, which is the book that's just come out this year, and which talks about this second vulnerability. It also would teach you how to step by step get closer to the Lord and do some of the things that I told Logan to do. But listen to what this guy said, and then I'm going to stop for a little bit and we'll see if we can get a conversation going. He said, on a personal note, the idea and thoughts about stress causing masturbation desires was so huge to me when I heard you talk about it. After being molested as a child by my cousin and dealing with many years of porn use, it was already difficult enough to overcome those desires to masturbate to sexual triggers. But even after I finally got all of that under control, listen closely to what he says here. I could never figure out why certain things would set me off sexually, unrelated to any outside sexual triggers. I now see that I have been responding sexually to stress and anxiety in ways that I must now address. Okay, so he's for the first time seeing the connection between non-sexual and sexual issues. But listen to what else he says. But that is not all that your book has done for me. I've started one-on-one worship times with the Lord that are changing my life. I have really enjoyed how my conversations have changed with my wife regarding these issues too. And I can be much more transparent now with my buddies about sexual sin after reading this book. I have not even finished the book yet, but you are blessing me, and I want to keep pushing for everyone I know to have this same level of conviction about sexual sin. And I want to create the freedom in my life and my family that you have shown that I can have. Thank you. That's pretty cool, isn't it? Where he's finally connecting the dots, and now he's very close to finally being free. So I'm going to go ahead and just open it up now. Those are a couple of really good stories that kind of help shape the picture. And I just want to know what your thoughts are.